Grace! Since when did you start volunteering as a nurse for beggars? No wonder no serious man has come for your hand. You can laugh at his clothes. You cannot laugh at his dignity. Because you didn't sew either one. Go and laugh at your own future.
The bowl in his lap was empty. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, stiff with dried mud, and his feet, bare, cracked, calloused, had not felt the inside of a shoe in 3 weeks. Across the street, 3 women in designer heels pointed at him and laughed until tears ran down their faces. He said nothing. He only lowered his head. What none of them knew, what no one on that street knew, was that the beggar they were mocking could have bought the very ground they stood on, twice, and still had money left to spare. Before you continue watching, I need to tell you something. This story is going to make you cry, then make you angry, then make you cheer, and right when you think you have figured out the ending, it is going to hit you with a twist that changes the meaning of everything you watched before it. If you have ever been loved for the wrong reasons, or loved someone who was hiding who they really were, then like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Then this story is for you. The story begins on a Friday night in Victoria Island, inside the glass-walled ballroom of the Coca Grand Hotel. Chandeliers the size of small cars hang over 300 guests in tuxedos and gowns. Tonight, David Coca is set to announce his engagement to Whitney Bello, daughter of Senator Folashade Bello, a union his father has been engineering for 2 years, one that would merge 2 of Lagos's most powerful families. David stands at the edge of the room holding a glass of champagne he has not touched, watching Whitney laugh loudly at something her friend whispered. He cannot explain it, but something inside him feels hollow, like a man standing in his own house and realizing he does not recognize the furniture. Then it happens. A phone falls from Whitney's clutch bag and lands face up on the marble floor. A message glows on the screen, from a contact saved as Baby O. It reads, "Just marry him and collect the alimony later. I'm not going anywhere, my love." David bends down, picks up the phone, and reads it in silence. Whitney's face turns pale as she snatches it from him, stammering excuses that die in her throat the moment she sees his expression. He does not shout. He does not cause a scene. He simply sets his champagne glass down on a passing tray, walks to the microphone that was meant for his engagement toast, and instead says 4 words into it. The wedding is cancelled. He walks out of the hotel that built his family's name, gets into his car, and tells Tony Bassi, the only driver he has ever trusted, the only man who has never once asked him for money, to just drive. Not home. Anywhere but home. That night, parked along the Lekki Epe corridor, staring at the lagoon, David says something that will set the entire story in motion. "Tony, I don't even know if my own mother loves me for me, or for what I can give her family. I need to know, once, before I die, what it feels like to be loved for nothing." Tony, who grew up in Ajegunle before working his way into the Coca household, does not laugh at him. Instead, he tells David about his uncle, a man who lost his legs in a factory accident and discovered, in his poverty, friends he never knew he had. David goes quiet. By the time the sun rises over the lagoon, he has made a decision that will terrify his father, confuse his company's board, and change 2 families forever. He is going to disappear, not physically, just David Coca, billionaire, is going to vanish. And in his place, a crippled beggar named Baba Ekun will appear on the streets of Lagos, with nothing but a wheelchair, a torn shirt, and a bowl. Only Tony will know the truth. Everyone else, his father, his cousin Richard, the entire Coca empire, will be told that David has traveled abroad indefinitely for personal reasons. Richard, delighted at the sudden freedom, is placed as acting CEO, a decision that will matter a great deal later in this story. 2 weeks later, A battered wheelchair rolls along the sandy paths of Makoko, the sprawling waterside settlement where wooden houses stand on stilts above the lagoon. In it sits a man with an unkempt beard, sun-darkened skin, and a shirt so torn it looks as though it survived a war. Nobody looks at him twice. In Makoko, there is always somebody worse off than you. He sleeps his first night under a fish-drying rack, and it is there that Grace Adeyemi finds him the next morning, nearly stepping on his outstretched legs on her way to sell smoked catfish at the market. Grace is unlike anyone David has ever encountered. She works from 4 a.m. to sundown, carries firewood on her head, negotiates prices with the sharpness of a lawyer, and somehow still finds time to laugh. A full, unguarded laugh that David finds himself thinking about hours after he hears it. When she sees the stranger in the wheelchair with no food and cracked lips, she doesn't ask questions. She simply hands him a wrapped piece of roasted fish and says, "Eat first, story reach later." That single sentence becomes the seed of everything that follows. Grace takes Baba Ekun to meet her father, Daniel Adeyemi, a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes who lives in a 2-room wooden house, held up by faith and rope. Daniel was once, decades ago, a mid-level businessman in Lagos, a fact he rarely speaks about, and which David notices but does not yet understand the weight of. Daniel takes one look at the stranger and says the words that will echo through the entire story. A hungry stranger at your door is a test from God. Don't fail it because you are also hungry. They take him in. They feed him from a pot that barely feeds the two of them already. They give him the only spare mat in the house. And for the first time since he can remember, David Coker, Baba Ekun to them, falls asleep without a single person in the room wanting anything from him. Weeks pass. Grace insists on taking Baba Ekun along to the market some days, wheeling him herself, because she says a person shouldn't be left alone with his thoughts for too long. It is on one of these days, the very scene that opens this story, that the humiliation happens. 3 young women, dressed in designer outfits that cost more than everything in the Adeyemi household combined, are strolling through the market when they spot Grace pushing the wheelchair. Bianca, the loudest of the 3, points and howls with laughter. "Grace! Since when did you start volunteering as a nurse for beggars? No wonder no serious man has come for your hand. You're busy pushing charity cases up and down." Tamara and Ovi join in, cackling, taking out their phones to record for their online followers, treating David's poverty like entertainment. David lowers his head, humiliated in a way that no boardroom failure or business loss has ever humiliated him, because this humiliation is aimed not at David Coker, the billionaire, but at the man sitting in that chair with nothing. And then Grace does something that changes David forever. She stands directly between him and the women, plants her feet in the sand and says, loud enough for the whole market to hear, "You can laugh at his clothes. You cannot laugh at his dignity, because you didn't sew either one. Go and laugh at your own future, because a woman who mocks the poor today is only auditioning for the poverty she will meet tomorrow." The market goes silent. Bianca's smile falters. The 3 women leave, embarrassed, and Grace simply resumes pushing the wheelchair as though nothing happened, muttering under her breath about people with money and no home training. David, behind his beggar's disguise, says nothing, but that night he cannot sleep. Not from hunger, not from the hard mat beneath him, but because, for the first time in his adult life, someone defended him without knowing there was anything in it for her. David's health, or rather his performance of ill health, escalates. He fakes a worsening limp, occasional dizziness, a plan he and Tony cooked up to test just how far Daniel and Grace's kindness would stretch. It works better than he ever expected, and far worse than he ever intended. Daniel takes Baba Ekun to a community clinic, where a doctor, genuinely fooled, tells them that the man's leg requires urgent surgery at a private hospital, or he risks permanent paralysis. The cost quoted is a sum that could feed the Adeyemi household for 4 years. David immediately tries to wave it off. "Don't worry yourselves, for my sake. I've lived this long already." But Daniel looks at him with an expression David will remember on his deathbed and says, "Ekun, in this life, when God drops a burden at your door, He is not asking whether you're ready to carry it. He is asking whether you have a heart." 3 days later, Daniel disappears for the entire day. When he returns, he is holding a folder of documents and will not meet Grace's eyes. He has sold the one thing his own late father left him, a small plot of ancestral land on the outskirts of Epe, land that has been in the Adeyemi family for 2 generations, land that Daniel always said he would rather die than let go of. Grace weeps when she finds out, not from anger at her father, but from the crushing weight of watching him give away his last inheritance for a stranger's sake. David, watching this unfold, feels something inside him break for the first time in the entire experiment. This was never supposed to go this far. He was supposed to observe kindness, not destroy a family's future to test it. That night, unable to bear it any longer, David makes a decision. The morning after the land sale, David can no longer stomach the lie. He asks Grace and Daniel to sit with him. His hands shake, not from any illness, but from fear of losing the first honest connection of his adult life. He tells them everything: his real name, the Billionaire company that bears his family's name, the broken engagement, the decision to disappear and test whether anyone could love him without knowing what he had. He even offers, immediately, to return every kobo of the land money, with interest, with a new house besides. The silence that follows is the loudest silence in the entire story. Grace stands up first. Her voice, when it comes, is not loud. It is worse than loud. It is quiet and shaking with betrayal. "You let my father sell his father's land. You let me defend you in the market with my own mouth, my own name, while you were laughing at us behind a mask. You didn't test our love, David. You tested our ignorance, and you're calling it love." Daniel says even less. He simply looks at David for a long moment, then says, "Leave my house before I say something I will regret in front of God." It is the same man who once said, "Hunger at your door is a test from God," and now he is the one failing to forgive. David leaves that night with nothing but the torn shirt on his back, walking away from the only home that has ever felt real to him, while behind him, Grace collapses into her father's arms and cries in a way she has not allowed herself to cry since her mother passed years earlier. David returns to the world he left behind, only to discover it has changed in his absence. Richard, now comfortable as acting CEO, has quietly begun selling off segments of the Coca Group's less publicized land holdings, land David never paid close attention to, scattered plots the company acquired over decades, including, it turns out, cheap acquisitions in and around Epe. When David demands the company records, Richard stalls, smiles too widely, and says the sales were restructuring, nothing more. But David's instinct, sharpened, ironically, by weeks of having nothing and needing to notice everything, tells him something is deeply wrong. Meanwhile, Chief Augustine Coker is incandescent with rage, not about the land, but about the broken engagement to Whitney Bello. He summons David to the family estate and delivers an ultimatum: return to the engagement, salvage the political alliance with Senator Bello, and abandon whatever foolishness occupied him these past 2 months, or be cut off from the company entirely. David, for the first time in his life, stands his full height in front of his father and says no. He tells him about Grace, not asking permission, simply stating fact. And Chief Coker's expression shifts from rage to something colder and more calculating. He asks one question: this girl, Adeyemi, you said her name is. David nods, confused by the reaction. His father says nothing further, but his jaw tightens in a way David has seen only once before, years ago, when a former business partner's name was mentioned at a family dinner and swiftly changed. The documents David finds that night unravel everything. 30 years ago, his father, Augustine Coker, had a business partner, a sharp, ambitious young trader named Daniel Adeyemi, who helped build the earliest version of the Coker shipping business from almost nothing. When the business became profitable, Augustine forged partnership documents, diluted Daniel's shares to nearly zero, and forced him out with a small, humiliating payout, keeping the growing empire and the valuable waterfront land in Epe that Daniel's family owned entirely for himself. Through decades of quiet, dishonest maneuvering, Daniel never had the money or the connections to fight back. He disappeared from Lagos's business circles entirely, eventually resurfacing years later as a humble laborer in Makoko, raising his daughter alone after his wife's death, never speaking of the empire he helped build with his own hands, or the man who stole it from him. David realizes, with a cold shock that nearly stops his heart, that the land Daniel sold to pay for Baba Ekun's surgery, that small remaining plot he had left, the one true inheritance from his own father, was purchased by a shell company called CG Development Partners, CG, the same initials David saw stitched on the land agent's pocket, Coker Group. His own family's company, operating through Richard, has been quietly reacquiring the last of what it stole from Daniel Adeyemi 30 years ago, because new satellite mapping has revealed the Epe waterfront corridor sits above a valuable deep-water shipping route the Lagos state government is preparing to develop, a route that would make that land worth 10 times the entire Coker Group's current holdings. The tragedy that has bound David and Grace together was never an accident. It was engineered, generations in the making, by David's own father. Armed with 30-year-old documents, forged signatures, and Richard's recent shell company acquisitions, David does not go quietly. He calls an emergency board meeting of the Coker Group, invites the financial press, and, most importantly, has Tony drive to Makoko to bring Daniel and Grace to Victoria Island, though neither of them yet know why. In front of the full board, the press, and his own stunned father, David lays every document on the table. He explains the forged 1998 partnership papers. He explains Richard's recent shell company purchases of the Epe corridor. He explains, in front of the cameras, exactly who Daniel Adeyemi is, and exactly what was taken from him. Chief Augustine Coker, cornered in front of the entire business world he spent his life building a reputation within, tries to deny it, until Daniel Adeyemi himself steps forward, holding a single faded photograph, himself and a much younger Augustine, standing together in front of their very first rented shipping container in 1997, arms around each other's shoulders, both smiling like men who believed they would build something together for life. The room goes silent. Augustine Coker, for the first time in the story, has nothing to say. Richard is escorted out by security minutes later, his shell company fraud now a matter for the police, his ambitions collapsing in front of the same board members he tried to impress. Suspense beat resolved. The audience finally understands the CG Development Partners mystery, the black SUV watching David leave Makoko, and why Chief Coker's face changed at the mention of the Adeyemi name. All threads tie together in this single scene. In the weeks that follow, David transfers the entire disputed Epe waterfront corridor back into Daniel Adeyemi's name, plus a formal, public, board-approved settlement for 30 years of stolen shipping revenue, an amount so large it makes Daniel, quietly and without any celebration, one of the wealthiest landowners on the Lagos coastline overnight. But it is not the money that brings David back to Grace. It is a smaller moment. He finds her one evening at the old fish drying rack in Makoko, where he first slept. And he does not bring lawyers, documents, or apologies rehearsed for cameras. He simply sits down on the sand beside her, the way Baba Ekun once did, and says, "I'm not asking you to forgive the lie. I'm asking you to see that everything after the lie, every night I didn't leave when I could have, every time I chose your father's hunger over my own comfort, that part was never a test. That part was just me, finally being someone real." Grace looks at him for a long time. Then she reaches over, picks up a piece of smoked fish from the rack between them, breaks it in half, and hands him a piece. The exact same gesture from the very first day they met. She says only, "Eat first, story reach later." And for the first time since the truth came out, she smiles. 6 months later, Lagos society pages that once mocked David Coker's broken engagement to Whitney Bello are instead filled with photographs of his wedding to Grace Adeyemi, held not in a glass-walled Victoria Island ballroom, but on the sandy shore of Makoko, under string lights, with fried fish and jollof rice, served to hundreds of neighbors who once knew her simply as the fish seller's daughter. With his father's business empire under new, honest leadership and Daniel's restored fortune, combined with David's resources, the couple launches the Adeyemi Coker Foundation, providing free surgeries, mobility equipment, and housing grants for Lagos's disabled and displaced communities, the very people David once had to disguise himself as, just to finally understand them. The story closes on Grace, now David's wife, wheeling an elderly disabled man toward a newly built clinic, bearing her father's name, the same gentle patience she once showed a stranger with a torn shirt and an empty bowl. Proof, in the end, that the truest wealth in Lagos was never behind the tinted windows of a Coker family SUV. It was sitting in the sand at Makoko the entire time, waiting for someone honest enough to notice it. Welcome to the family if this is your first time here. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Daniel's position, selling everything for a stranger? I read every comment, so don't be shy.